Hello friends, in this video we will see data binding in AngularJS. A data binding in AngularJS is automatic synchronization of data between model and the view components. The Angular way of data binding lets you treat the model as a single source of truth in your application. The view is the projection of model at all times. When the model changes, the view reflects the change and vice versa. The data binding technique in Angular is known as two-way binding. It is known as two-way binding because any changes in the model is instantly projected to the view, and anything changes in the view, it is instantly updated to the model as well. So that is why it is known as a two-way binding, and at any given point view is the projection of model. So basically model is the single source of truth in your application. So this is what is known as a two-way binding. Now we will see how two-way binding is different from the one-way binding, which we see in most of the templates. Now we'll see one-way binding first. So most of the templating system binds data in one direction. The template and the model components are merged together into a view. Once the merge occurs, after that changes to model or related sections of the view are not automatically reflected in the view. Any changes the user makes on the view are not reflected to the model also. The developer has to write code that constantly syncs model with the view and vice versa. For example, if you take an example of an MVC view, so you have an action method. In action method, you basically create a view model object. You then fill the view model object with the information or the data. Then you pass the view model to the view, and then the view renders the data and the controls. Now if user make any changes on the view, it is not automatically updated to the model. So you have to write an extra code which will post the form again to the action method. Then it will update the database, then the view model, and then view is again rendered. So basically the things work in a single way or in a one way. That is why it is known as a one-way binding. But there is some difference in the two-way binding. We'll see that as well. So here you can see Angular works differently. First, template containing the uncompiled HTML along with additional markup and directives is compiled on the browser. The compilation step produces a live view. Any changes to this view are immediately reflected in the model, and any changes in the model are propagated to the view. The model is a single source of truth for the application state. Now we can think of a view as an instant projection of a model. So basically what happens, once the view is rendered on the browser, anything you change in the model, that will be instantly reflected in the view, and anything which you change on the view, it will be instantly updated to the model. Okay, so likewise if you see in this image, the model and the view are connected and updated instantly as soon as there are any changes in the view or the model, and template is attached to the view. So this is known as a two-way binding, where there is an instant synchronization between the model and the view. We'll see one example on this. So here we have a simple controller. So we have a simple AngularJS application, so wherein we are following a modular structure. So basically we have app.js for our app, where we are registering my app, and we are also defining the dependencies. So what happens when this AngularJS app is loaded, these dependencies are also called. So right now we are only concentrating on controller because we don't need directives and filters for this example. So we are only concentrating on controller. So we have controller.js for the controller purpose. So here we are having a single controller, that is my controller, and we have defined a message, scope.message, and we are using this or rendering this message on our view. So here on the view, so on the view we are referring angular.min.js, our AngularJS file, app.js and remaining JS files. We have defined ng app my app to our body tag, so it basically register our body tag with this my app. So this body tag and our app.js is connected by ng app directive. Then this div, we are using ng controller directive to connect to our my controller. Now anything defined in this controller, all the scope object we can use inside this div tag. So here we are rendering our message. As you can see on the view, the message is rendered. So now what we are going to do, in order to demonstrate the two-way binding, we are going to have a simple text box. which will ask user to enter their name. So we'll say input type text, and we are going to create this property in the scope. So in order to create property in the scope, we'll use ng model and we'll name it as name. So this will create a model property on the scope, and when user types anything in this, we are going to bind whatever the user types into a bold tag, and we can do this using the expression, that is interpolation sign, and inside this I'm going to use the same model property. So what happens, anything user types in this text box, that will be automatically updated to the name property. So let's see how it works. So let me have a line break here. So now if I type anything on this view, you can see it is automatically updating the bold tag as well. So how it is working, so when you type anything, when the user is typing anything in this text box, now this text box is connected to the name model property on the scope. So when you write anything in this text box, that this name property on the model is updated. Now as view is the instant projection of the model updates the view property name here as well. So this is how the two-way binding works. So everything is updated as per the model. So let's move further. So now the next question comes into your mind, or it also came to my mind as well when I was learning AngularJS. So the next question came into my mind, it was how this works, how everything is getting updated. So how AngularJS keep track or updates all things connected to a single model property. So Angular maintains a simple array of watchers. So basically it maintains an array of watchers in the scope object. If you inspect any scope object, you will find that it contains an array named $watchers. Now each watcher is an object that contains following things. So basically AngularJS maintains a watchers array in the scope object. So basically these watchers play important role in synchronization. So how it works? Now AngularJS has three components. The first component is an expression. So expression can be any property, like in our example the name can be an expression, and it can be a variable which the watcher is monitoring. So it basically monitors a particular model property. A last known value of an expression. So it basically has the last known value of that model property. Now this can be checked against the current computed value of an expression. So what happens, this watcher keeps track on a model property. If there is any change, it compares with the last value, and if there is a change between the last value and the current value, it triggers a function and makes the scope as dirty. So the third part in the watcher is a function. So this function is called if there is any change in the last and the current value and the scope is marked as dirty. So what happens in the function? A function will be executed if the watcher is dirty. So inside this function, by default, the synchronization code is written by the AngularJS, which is maintained by the AngularJS. So it basically updates all the model properties, or view and synchronization happens because of this function. So let's see how we can check whether there are watchers object on the scope or not. So in order to do that, in order to inspect the scope, I'm going to have a button here. I'm going to set the value attribute of this button as, and I'm also going to use ng-click directive, and on click of this button I'm going to call a function, and the name of function is change scope. Now in the controller I'm going to define the function. So let's create the definition for the function. So my function name is change scope, and I'll pass a function to this variable, and inside this function I'm going to change the name property. So I'm updating the name property on the scope to welcome. Okay, let me refresh my view and I click on this button. Oh, something is wrong. Okay, this is wrong. Now if I again refresh it and if I click, yeah, it is working now. So now what we are going to do, we are going to open the developer tool, We'll move to the source tab, and inside this you can see the JS file listed here. I'm going to go to the controller.js, and I'll have a debugger at the end of this method. And now I'm going to click on my button. Now it is in the debugging state, and so you can check the scope object. So if you open or expand this object, you will see a watchers, $$ watchers. So this is the array. So inside this we have object. If you expand one of the object, you can see there's an expression, there's a function, and there's a last value. So these are the watchers which track any change in the model value, and it makes the scope dirty and it performs a synchronization task. So this is about the watcher and the role of watchers in the data binding. So we'll move to our next part, how watchers are defined. So how watchers are created in AngularJS. So there are three ways basically. You can create it explicitly using $watch function, $scope.watch. So you have to specify the model property or a variable on which you want to create a watcher, and you have to also specify a function which will be called if there is a change in the current value and the last value. The second way is using an interpolation sign. So basically when you bind a model property using double curly braces, it automatically creates a watcher on that property. So this is the second way. This is the implicit way of creating a watcher. Now the third implicit way of creating a watcher is using a directive, that is ngModel. So what ngModel does is it creates a model property on the scope, and it also creates a watcher on that. Now these two we have already seen, and it works implicitly. So you'll be working on this quite often. So we'll see the example for the first one, how we can do that. So in order to see that, let's have our controller.js. Now we have a button here. So what we are going to do now, in this button we are already calling this change scope function. So we are going to create a watch on our model property, that is name, and the function we are going to call. So we are going to supply the function here itself, and this function I am going to accept two values, that is new value and old value, and I'm going to alert both the values. So let me first show the old value. What happens when you click this button, a watcher will be created on the name, and after that if you change anything in this name, then this function will be called and alert will be shown on the UI. So let's see if that works or not. So let me save my content in Notepad and I refresh this button. So right now if you type anything, then nothing is happening because currently the watcher is different, and on the button click we are going to add our own watcher. So I think that is already done. Now if you change anything, okay, I think there is some problem. Okay, yeah, new value is not defined. Okay, I've added wrong spelling. Okay, now I think it should work. So if I click this function, and now you can see the alert is shown. Now consecutively if you change anything in this text box, now if I am adding a, it will show that old value was undefined and new value is a. Now if I type b, it will show old value is a and new value is ab. So now it has created a new watcher function on the name property, and whenever you change anything in this, that watcher function will be called. So this is how you can define the watcher in AngularJS explicitly. And now moving to the last part of our session, that is Angular predefined data binding directives. So in now we are going to see what directives are available with us, which are related to data binding. So we'll see one by one. So first is the ngbind. It binds the inner text of the HTML element. So basically, in order to demonstrate this, let's first clean our view and clean our model as well, controller as well. So currently we don't have anything but a single message, and on the view as well I'm going to clear everything except the message part. So now our view is clean. Now what we are going to do, we are going to have a simple model property, that is scope dot first name. I'm going to set it as Mesut, and I'm going to bind this to a particular control. You can do it by using the interpolation sign, like if I'm going to bind it to a bold tag, so you can do this like this, or even you can do it this way as well, using the ngbind directive. Both going to do the same work. You can see Mesut. So this is how the ngbind is used to set the inner HTML property of a control. So moving to the next. So the next is ngbind template. So similar to ngbind but allows for multiple templates. Now I'll have a simple example to demonstrate, and it is very interesting example, and it will clear your concept about ngbind template. Now along with the first name I'm going to have last name as well, and last name, as you know, it's Ozil, Mesut Ozil. Now if I cannot bind another variable using ngbind. Now using the interpolation I can do that very well, like this. You can see Mesut Ozil, or if I want space here, I can provide space as well. But using ngbind I cannot bind two variables. You can see it will show nothing. So in order to bind multiple variables or multiple expressions, you have to use ngbind template. Then inside this you can bind multiple variables or multiple expressions. Now you will see there are two Mesut Ozil. So if I have a break line here, then I'll be able to see it very clearly. You can see Mesut Ozil. So ngbind template is similar to ngbind, but ngbind template supports multiple templates. Moving to the next part, the next directive we have is ng non-bindable. So what it does, it declares a region of content for which data binding will be skipped. So basically what happens is, so if I have now currently this bold tag are binding data using interpolation sign, expression sign, and using ngbind template. So if I include them inside a div, and on this div if I use ng non bindable, I think I'm writing them correct, yeah, correct, I'm spelling it rightly, and if I refresh it, you won't be seeing this as a binding, so this will be treated as a string. So this is how you can create a non-bindable region using ng non-bindable directive. So coming to the next is the ngbind HTML. So creates a data binding using inner HTML property of an HTML element. So it basically it also binds the inner HTML property, but it binds the HTML tag as well. It basically renders the HTML tag. For an example, let me go to my controller, and on this name I want it to be italic. So here I am surrounding the Mesut with italic tags. So but if I refresh it here, okay, let me remove this non-bindable area. Now if I check, you can see there will be an error. just a minute. Let me have a simple poll tag, and I'll use ng bind html, and my property name is first name. Now if I refresh it, you can see it is showing me an error in the console, and the error is that it is unsafe, $SCE unsafe. So basically it is saying it is unsafe to render the HTML tags or bind the HTML tags. So how you can handle this is by using $CE service. So you can see we have accepted the object of $SCE as a dependency. We have used dependency injection to get its object, and then we are saying trust HTML whatever you are passing code. So we are basically using this toTrusted function. So we'll use this on our view. So we can use .to, or we can use this function, and we'll pass this first name, and that will do it for us. So if we refresh it, now you can see the method is showing in the italics because we have passed italics tag from here. So this is how ng bind HTML, basically it also binds or renders the HTML tag with the data binding. So these are the 5 directives which are used for data binding, and I think we are done with the data binding session. There are other topics which are closely related to data binding, like scope and digest cycle. So we'll be discussing it in our future videos. I hope you like this video. Thank you.